Hi, everybody. Welcome to week 8 of our English 5795 course. Okay, so this week we are in a transition because next week we're going to be really focusing on methodologies. We're going to be really talking deeply about ethnographic methods with the view of putting them to work in our inquiry projects. This week is somewhat of a marginal transition week. That's not the word I want to use. The word interstitial is in my brain, but you'll see why later. It's in between. We are coming out of our time of really focusing and diligently going through literature about the rhetorics of space and place. So we're going to kind of bring that to a conclusion. And we're also going to be thinking about the methodologies that are presented to us in this week's readings. So, zipping it all together, I guess you could say, this week, I'm going to go ahead and switch over to our Canvas view, and we'll just jump right in. Okay, so here we are in week 8. And one of the things that you'll see is that there are 2 readings that I'm assigning to you. And because we're moving forward into the space where you guys are going to be finding and evaluating and synthesizing your own sources for your inquiry project, I'm giving you the choice of an extra chapter from our book, Black Landscapes Matter. It's linked here to the library's page where we can access it digitally. So all you have to do is sign in with your Wayne ID to get the full book online. We do have a chapter out of Black Landscapes Matter that I am also additionally assigning to you this week, and this article, Empathizing with Marginalized Bodies, which is a lengthier article, but there's lots of images in it, so it shouldn't be too arduous, I hope. All of this sort of bringing us together around almost like application of a lot of the things that we've already been talking about. We've been thinking about the rhetorics of various specific spaces into which we can write ourselves, in which we do write, and for which we write, as we've been thinking about our writing ecology maps and so forth. Here we're going to be thinking about the embodied experience of a designed space. So that's sort of like the grand theme, pulling it all together with everything that has come before, and hopefully then moving us into where we're going to go next. This week, our very last reading response will be due, and your very last reflection discussion. Just don't cry. I'm sure everyone's like, yes, finally. Over the week, you want to be watching this video, which of course you're already doing, Air 5, and reading through the selections, completing your last process writing before we really start getting into the inquiry projects. So I'm just going to head up here, open up this presentation, and we'll get into it. No QC title for this week: materiality design, empathy resistance. And here's your reflection questions, your final set of reflection prompts. How does the design of a space reflect or contribute to the ways it is used or viewed? Now, as I was writing these prompts, I was laughing a little bit to myself because they're very complicated and they use a lot of like if, and, or. Just roll with it, people, because one of the things we are learning about this semester is the fact that the rhetoric of space and place is both and in most cases. It's ephemeral, it's meaning-based, it's experiential, it's embodied, it's literal, it's figurative, it's a lot of things. Doesn't excuse my unwieldy grammar, but I'm just, saying, here, we can roll with it. The second reflection prompt for you this week is how can or does, so it's potential, but it can also be ongoing. How can or does our experience of the materiality of a space, so the physical, like you can touch it, literal space, or its design, produce empathy and or resistance? So those are two kind of key responses that can come that we see in the readings this week. Specifically, when we look at Propin's piece, she's focusing on a literal material space. Excuse me, the Lowell Mills project, from early in the 18th century, I believe, designed to control the process of change and channel it in an industrial sense. So this is an industrial site, and I just found the description of this fascinating. I don't know if you guys did, but just thinking about like this idea of a space where we live and work, and it's beautiful, and we have leisure activities and cultural outlets. Like, this is not a new idea. Google, Microsoft, right? Quicken Loans, like making your workspace, or attempting to make your workspace comfortable and livable, and attempting to attend to the social and aesthetic needs of your employees is not a new concept, as we see here. But it is a concept that can have more or less success. And that is part of what Propin's getting at here. She's attempting to conduct an ethnography in which she interrogates the idea of this space being everything it claims it's going to be. The theoretical frame that she's working with here is visual material rhetoric. So she's really thinking about the visuals, the physical layout, the literal like hardware of the space, and how it creates meaning for her as a participant. And she's using ethnography because that's one of the best ways to sort of get at an experiential meaning of a space, is to actually physically walk through it, observe, look at artifacts, and that's what she does here. And she's looking at this space, this heterotropic space. It's very controlled, designed with very specific entrances and exits, examining the effects of the design of this space on her own embodied experience, and throughout time, what it must have been for the girls who were hired to work at this mill. And so she's questioning whether or not the lives of these mill girls have been revisioned at all in the retelling of this mill's purpose and history. And so it's just very fascinating to see how she walks through the space. All the visuals that are packed into this chapter help us to sort of like secondarily experience what she's experiencing as she moves through the space and as she talks us through it. And I wanted to put this in here because, again, ethnographic methods are what you're going to use for your inquiry project. And this is a really nice example of a really thoughtful and lush ethnographic study of this space. Now, one of the things I found interesting about Propin's piece is that it's really examining the effect of time and history on a space's intended purpose and then actual enacted purpose. Here, by contrast, Cox's chapter on design and planning of Detroit is something that's ongoing. It's happening right now. I found it interesting, though, that we can't get away from history, right? Cox is going to start off by going through kind of extensively his personal history, and then get into how that applies to and how that shapes decisions that are enacted in Detroit for planning purposes. Detroit, one of the largest African American majority cities in the United States, And I think part of what's important about that is how key it is, as we've looked at the nature of Black landscapes to be overlooked, to be devalued, how important it is to value the city and to create a space that's representative of the majority population in the city. So I think it's fascinating how large a role landscape plays in this new city plan. Also kind of a wily, smart knitting together. Again, we're synthesizing this sort of rural significance of land to grow trees, to grow crops, to have space where you have your own sustenance in a way, and then knit that together with the urban experience of being connected, of creating pathways, of creating arteries, if you will, that can help people move around a city space. And so for that reason, I think it's really fascinating, first of all, how Cox approaches relationships in developing the Department of Yes. I thought that was kind of hilarious, but also really brilliant, because we're saying yes to relationships, to partnerships between schools and nonprofits, and pulling people together instead of siloing them apart, which is kind of revolutionary in a sense, at least feels like it is in this cultural moment. But I think more germane to our conversations around design is this intentional green space, this intentional infrastructure, or as Cox says, this use of interstitial land to stitch together the areas of the city that had traditionally been separated by areas of abandonment or decay, and like knitting those spaces together with purposeful green space, which I thought was fascinating. And like all for what intended purpose is to create connectedness in the same way that our tendons and ligaments connect muscles and bones within our body to keep everything moving. So pulling it all together, I think it's really interesting as you think back to our reflection prompts for how can design, both in the past and currently, be a touch point for empathy, for resistance, for the intended purpose to actually be enacted, if that's what we want. Okay, I could probably keep going about this, but I'm going to pull it to a close and close out this video.